Zach from Cobbler, California, back here in Breckenridge, getting ready for Rock Cobbler 13. Now, let's talk numerology. I was a little worried when we hit the landmark number 10. Anniversary, it was a really special ride, but for the last 3 years I've kept my eye on number 13. It's an evil number and Sam is capable of doing some very special things. Looking at the course profile and everything, it's a little bit lighter than normal, so it can't be that easy. It's a cobbler, so let's roll. It's the start of a new day, and there's coffee around to get the juices flowing, with an interesting development to check in. As the last 2 years, Joey has graced me with our favorite unlucky number, but this year, maybe being trouble adjacent was a better thing? While the sun was still coming up, vibes were still high, as Sam was positioned for his first job, getting those ready for the 93-mile boulder distance, lining them up again Le Mans style, with a sneaking suspicion the pink guy might be someone to watch, as those of us doing the cobbler knew that our time would come soon, hopefully everyone knowing the course well, as we'd be returning to that historic spot where Tony survived his bull encounter 4 years ago. Starting out of Piles Camp, the first 13 miles are going to be fast ones, including a rare early morning visit through Ethel's. The climbing gets real going into the northern ranchlands, and our first return to the cobbler's most infamous moment. The round mountain stretch I count as the prettiest, but introducing a new ascent by Poso Creek. After blasting down Rancheria, the ominous Breckenridge climb awaits, but is the new diversion at the top easier? The 10 miles after the peak are for recovery and very fast, with just a small climb early on. The home stretch doesn't have any big sustained efforts, at least on the bike. All in all, Cobbler 13.0 is a relatively petite 70 miles, but get ready for a few punches. For the first time since I've ever done a cobbler, there were no waves, just one big giant mass start. As today, there were two major themes during the ride. My first goal was to finish at 1:30, but since we were starting a little bit later, 2 felt a little bit safer. Not that I was worried about placement, I just love getting back and having time to spend with everyone here. And beginning with a controlled start did keep the pace down a little. The other central theme was how Sam painted the course this year. There's always a framework, but there's a definite science for how the route unfolds, and this year I was definitely more cognizant with the care that he puts in. Having an early foray into Hart Park, it's no surprise the cobbler chose dirt over the bike path, which shouldn't surprise you being bumpier and a little more sandy at the same time. And being familiar with this area, there was no surprise that we'd be dismounting our bikes, knowing that there were other ways around the hill, but yeah, I really felt like the cobbler had started. We had a couple miles up here on the plateau that really has an endless amount of pathways to choose from. But ultimately I knew we'd have to head down it, this time taking one of the most expedient routes that I've been familiar climbing many times, just having done so in our Ascended a month ago. But while I don't think I've ever gone down it before, my prediction did come true that the bumpiness would become a factor. It wasn't just the bottles that were spraying all over the place, but just keep an extra eye out for those searching for them. So I just looked straight ahead and hoped for the best. I knew that we would be coming up on a cobbler landmark soon, just going into Ethel's a lot earlier than normal, and yet people still showed up, but I think everyone wanted to hold off on the libations for now. We exited out, making our way around the oil fields, where I knew this first hour would be the fastest of the morning, and also a place where I needed to get ahead of pace, because more flat concrete miles wouldn't come in until the end. So it was nice that we were working together to save some watts, but I know once we turned into the northern ranchlands, that's when my strategy wouldn't be so straightforward. There's a couple of key points here as we had this dirt all to ourselves. Immediately, it's tackling this 2.6 mile climb, that even though the grades are pretty inconsistent, you can still keep a good flow with it. Most importantly, having good gears to spin through the tougher parts, as when the Cobbler happens on even numbered years. This is the first big climb you'll probably have to face. But if you're unfamiliar with Bakersfield, I'm sure by now your outlook is really starting to change, especially this time of year with the greens that maybe have waned just a little bit since it hasn't rained in a month, and the dry spell might be a bigger issue than having no rain at all. But this is a pretty clean section, and finishing off around the 1 hour mark put me in pretty good shape. Now, while we had a few dips, it was good to finally get some extended downhillage, as this section would be a good spot to see if sizing down from my 55s to 50s was a great idea, not being bounced around too much, even more towards the bottom. That evaluation point only lasted a couple minutes, with a return to climbing with another 1.5 where the grade wasn't that egregious, and was able to keep a conversational pace, which is great because the Cobbler is like a homecoming, pretty centrally located, seeing people from across the state, and great to see Joe, as this was kind of a send-off before back surgery. But I was taking stock of myself too, with my legs not feeling terrible, but having done gravel and wine and the LA Tourist race the last 2 weekends, I wasn't feeling quite springy, but maybe things will change. Well, we had our first single track section of the day. I was pretty aware of its history. Glad that the group was more spread out now than it was 4 years ago, because definitely the top is a little tenuous. But even as it started to flatten out, I knew the skinniness of it would be testing. And while I didn't catch it on camera, I'm pretty sure I crashed at the same spot I did before. Not bad, but landing square on my arm that I had split open the week before, making me feel like I had 1.5 hands to work with. But fortunately our path split away from the part of the canyon that turned cyclists into matadors, and more importantly, not descending as much, meaning more elevation to gain back. But this is another climb I'm familiar with. Glad that we met it only halfway, with the road being a little chunky, but definitely tolerable in the up direction. Just a little bit of putting your head down here, and maybe not noticing the views, as I remember topping it off would not go well for everyone. And while kudos to those that rode all the way up, I don't think expending that effort is worth the few seconds it'll save. I guess run with whatever technique works for you. While there is no nomenclature out here, whatever dirt road we were on, we were done climbing it. And shockingly, we were pretty much done for this area, because when I break down cobblers, I divide into regions like the northern Ranchlands. And while this course had a lot of similarities to the toughest one that happened 2 years ago, the biggest difference had been some climbs were cut out. So this year in the Ranchlands, we only had about 11 miles instead of 18. And you're always thinking here, is there something dubious that isn't showing up in the numbers? But I knew we had a lot of downhill coming. And even this back section here we've done before, it was still sloggy, but we were only doing about half of it. Now hitting Round Mountain Road earlier than I thought, I definitely felt like I was playing with house money, but would I cash in? We weren't on pavement for long, as at mile 23 we passed our second pit stop that I decided to pass through, still being on my first bottle. But the story here was the first time we rode by Poso Creek. It was a fun little single track if you're also into dodging shrubbery, which felt a little like the Dagobah system that would have been exponentially worse had there been recent rains. But this little water crossing ended up being deeper than I thought, not just mucking up my rear camera, but also cleaning off a lot of lube on my chain. Eventually the swampiness seed is something a little bit more favorable, being back on Ranchland, but this being our third year in the Round Mountain region, this was our first introduction to this incline. Definitely not as steep as the other option, thanks to its serpentine nature, and at 2 miles at 5%, stayed pretty steady, so I definitely prefer gaining elevation efficiently rather than forcing myself into the red zone, which would come later. At the top, I knew that we merged with the previous climb coming up on these derricks, and maybe one of these days I'll remember to take back some of this crude. But what I always seem to forget are the high amplitude of the hills at this juncture that only count as a couple, but once again I do choose to dismount. But peaking, that steep grade sends you into the next downhill, bringing back that amusement park feel again. And after that climb, you feel like you should be getting a lot of downhill return. But it's strange that for the next 4.5 miles, it actually evens out, and just enjoy it while you can. But from a videographer's standpoint, I wish the sun would pop out of the horizon, because I think the Round Mountain area is my favorite, just as long as there's no issues with the bovines. I knew there would be some punctuation leaving Round Mountain, but with this 2/3 of a mile climb, paired with a reasonable grade, it was easy to accept, and once again feeling pretty good about my progress. And while my body wasn't feeling any better, more importantly, it wasn't feeling worse too. With one short descent down to make it to Rancheria, that was teeth chattering with the horse hooves embedded in the dry mud, but I was thinking glass half full on how much we've avoided it until now. Exiting out to my most anticipated pit stop with the Grizzly Cycles crew on hand and Kevin taking pics with this Hawaiian vibe as I took an extra minute or two here. Great to see their couch making in from the home office, along with Priscilla tending bar, and it was quite the scene. But leaving, there was some concern on my mind, knowing making it to the Breckenridge Peak would be the most critical part of today's ride. The good news is I could expedite my progress here, definitely needing this 3.5 mile descent down Rancheria, with wide turns so you don't have to think about much, and a great place to let your hands, arms, and joints recover. As I was cognizant to get into a tuck to save a second or two, crossing the Kern River would signal that the next phase would start soon, making our yearly return into Rio Bravo Ranch, which definitely feels welcoming at this entrance. And I figured future Boulder champ Lachlan Morton would have already been ahead of me, so following his line was pretty temporary. Familiar that we'd making our crossing underneath the 178, as every iteration I've done the Cobbler had us go through the creek, but always having to guess how much water was in there and how much my setup would get doused. Yeah. The good news past the crossing is the distance to the top of Breckenridge is 1.25 miles less than it was 2 years ago, and would be even more if we didn't circumvent these orange trees. Though we did have one constant, being this nearly 1.5 mile climb, which eyeballing it doesn't look anywhere near its 7.3% average. And the bottom part is a little more gentle, and maybe the views have something to soften your attitude too. And I'm sure if it had a name like Cal Trail of Death, we'd feel far more differently here. But as we progressed, it wasn't the grade that was so much the problem. But yes, we could feel the presence of that heavy herd underneath, constantly having to weather bump after bump. And even with some front and rear suspension on my bike, it definitely put me on the pain train. And of course, the top is even worse. And here, I did contemplate whether walking was the right move, but I decided to stay seated because we were only a few miles from the peak, and maybe I paid a little bit of a toll, but I plan on doing a lot more walking on the next climb. Cresting is a real reward for the legs and the eyes, as you can start to make sense of the dynamic with these Kern County hills coming into contact with the Southern Sierra, but you can't get too nostalgic here, because here you really need to grip it and pay attention, as I had the course loaded and then somehow taken off, as not reading the sign right, and hello overshoot, which in the scheme of things might not be that big of a deal, but mentally, having to add those few extra pedal strokes might not put you in the right frame of mind. On the upside, I had more people around thanks to my timing, and the story here wasn't exactly more downhill, but normally we're headed back up this hill for another short climb that by itself isn't normally tough, but around here the punishment starts to feel exponential, as the lead into Breckenridge is a familiar one. Normally crossing along this fence line, though conditions felt worse than previous, needing to stay on that packed down strip to feel efficient, making it harder to pass, but this really wasn't that long of a stretch. After releasing for this one little dip down, and the familiar momentum suck here that turns into a hike-a-bike.
How's it going, buddy?
This is where I feel Breckenridge begins. As there's one thing that I dread on these even-numbered years, is having to climb it. But this year I knew there were stretches where the ascent was different, but I had no idea if it was for the better or worse. I just know I'm thankful at the bottom, where the climbing is palatable, and my mental trick is to calculate my time like I'm biking 3 miles per hour, because anything faster would feel golden. But these fellas were nice to say hi, and to bring up my squeaky chain, which there was nothing I could do until I hit the top of this peak. But the biggest development here was this unexpected single track that I'm pretty sure wasn't on the map, But even as bumpy as it was definitely far more direct and a little less climbing, so at worst, there was no loss here. The one calamity I knew I could not avoid was this deep dip. That yeah, I normally focus on keeping momentum on these big U-shapes, but here it just doesn't really matter. And in my eyes, was the most painful hike a bike so far, but at least it was familiar. While I had it longer, this gentleman informed us we were 1.25 miles from the top. Mentally, it would be better if I was on the wrong side of it. As from this part of the climb, it's hard for numbers meaning anything just because you still can't see where you're going. The biggest change to Breckenridge happened here in this final mile, not starting off good because of this dubious descent. But once we were down here, you had a little bit of that trench feeling from episode 4 and a little DIY action getting around things. But the real upshot was not having that grueling grade we normally do, because there's already been so much walking in the last 20 minutes that it's nice to get a flow here, even though you had to stop for a few seconds here and there. I memorized on the map that in this final right turn, the end was so close. Looking down this trench, I knew it was unique, so I had to try pulling out my camera, which, third time's a charm, was able to finally catch one of my crashes. Once again, not that severe, but I need to stop falling on that arm. And rounding this curve, I'm glad that man was right. Definitely going to put some chain lube on and refill the bottles, because even though the next 26 miles mostly downhill, I was going to need it. Even with the 4-minute pit stop, I was still ahead of where I wanted to be, rolling out 5 minutes before noon. And a warning to those jumping back on the bike, take the extra couple seconds to put everything away, because I was still fiddling with all my accoutrements, and the top of this canyon is a little rocky, so I was super fortunate not to crash, and definitely took it easy until I got a handle on things. But once the debris stopped becoming cumbersome, I was pretty sure I was going to enjoy this 5-mile stretch of dirt, as my right arm provided just enough strength not to fail too bad. A slight detour this year, going above the ranch instead through it, but either way I knew that the end of the dirt was near, and seeing the well-wishers on the side confirmed it. And entering Breckenridge Road, maybe this 1-mile climb could be a buzzkill, but the slope isn't that severe, and the nice run-in helps too. And unless you're really struggling, it'll only take a few minutes. And my concern wasn't how fast I did it, but more that I was going over it alone, with the next 4 miles being concrete downhill. But the grade here isn't as studious, which is kind of at that grade where you still have to pedal, and it'd be nice to have anyone else just to take turns. And it was a good move to have someone watch the intersection, approaching at speeds 30 miles and above. And if you're in the mood of playing an unforgettable trick on your family, tell them you're taking them to an amusement park, and then show up to the Enchanted Forest. I'm alone. I'm trying to occupy my mind here. I knew approaching the orchards, I'd be veering off soon, but since I didn't have the turn-by-turn directions on, it's a great thing to know you can always rely on the Cobbler course markings. Time for us to take our long turn on Edison Road, which is a throughway for some domiciles, but really for us we have to be on the lookout, because of the constant up and down, and some giant cutouts thanks to some unexplainable erosion. You have to be real cognizant out here trying to find the correct line, because I've caught people losing it here on video. But it was noticeably smoother turning off as we were coming into dirt bike country, still able to make good time, that I wasn't worried so much about speed, but just keeping the legs moving. And any stretch of pavement that would help expedite, I was for it, though there was still an inner worry that Sam would have something up his sleeve, but I didn't think it'd be here south of the highway. The one thing that didn't surprise me was this last climb. Not necessarily a hard one, more of a check-in on how lumpy your legs felt. But reaching Morning Drive, I hope that was our last real climb on a bike, using this overpass for a traditional crossing of 178, and then back onto some wandering dirt, which there's so many throughways here. It's hard for me to remember the details, but the route returned to pavement. Thank you, suburbs, where I had been lonely for a while, but I could see up ahead that I'd be merging soon with the Pebbler route, entering Hart Park, needing to cover 9 miles in about an hour, but I was going to remain suspicious until the Cobbler was over. Course-wise, we could have saved some distance just cutting straight across, but I had no complaints about this U-shaped progress, because I really appreciate what Sam had done with this year's route, because I was really impressed with what Sam did with this year's course, because there's obviously months of planning, but coming up with the final is a chess game, as a month ago this area was reading far different. So since that time I'm sure he had a plan for rain, or lack of rain, and while there were some teeth-chattering sections, he did a fantastic job keeping them at a minimum, and I think everyone's just going to remember today for the fun. We rolled by this odd-looking facility that we normally come across on our January rides, that I refer to as the Hawkins facility from Stranger Things. But while the most efficient way around is hugging the fence, the Cobbler route brought us onto single track, that on our send-its, a number of locals always split away, and it's never really for that long. So I was curious to see what these hills held, and even with a little grippage, I was glad for the experience. But returning to the center of the park, I knew what lay ahead, as this zone right off the bike path is normally where the featured hike-a-bike section is, and you're always curious to see the awe that others see approaching it. But eyeballing it, I wasn't as intimidated as normal.
Okay, clearly this is one of the tamer ones. I mean, there's an actual road, and I'm not having to dig my feet in on the side.
As for my first time at the Cobbler, I was able to push my bike up all the way, normally needing to carry it or to turn my feet sideways from keeling over. So I was thankful not being caught on this ridge and asking someone to throw me a rope. At the top, my legs weren't too wobbly to get back on the bike, and there was a lot of encouragement here, seeing people who I just saw seconds ago coming right back at me. So when I made this hairpin turn, I pretty much felt like the worst was over. As coming down, there were limited opportunities to try and extend this course. I was just hoping Sam wouldn't put us through quicksand or making us swim in the river. And while this last descent didn't have those careening corners like the refrigerator or Toad's Wild Ride, once I got through the rockier top portion, I had the same type of fun. Not as high as the amplitude going side to side, definitely a lot more straightforward, and a few more chances to catch some air. But at the same time, I just wanted to get back and not use this as an audition for Jackass, making a left turn to overlap this stretch that we did 60 miles ago, and definitely far more expedited thanks to having gravity onto our side. Once again needing to cross Alfred Harrell Highway, and with everyone spread out, of course we were going to use the tunnel, if I could fit through there. Making my way into Lake Ming County Park, I knew I was going to meet my time goal, and at this point, there was little use of turning the jets on, and instead, I was hoping some of my friends would catch up. And this area is shared by a lot of locals, not just for the bike riding, but also camping as well. And when we had that one final section right along the water, it might have been a good thing to actually go a little faster, because I just felt like I was bumping all over the place, just spinning. But then again, I wasn't that eager to find out, as I knew I was in the final stretch seeing all the parked cars, which I guess I paid more attention to rather than staying on course. But no matter, it was great to come in and hear the event crew call out my name.
Gravel by California. Zachary Rhino. It's full of trucks out there. Way to go, Zachary.
And another thing that makes the Cobbler special is its post-ride environment. Although Peter completing the boulder and his spokes might disagree, I think these slightly scaled back routes definitely help the mood here, with the time frame of people coming back definitely far more concentrated, which meant more something I can't get enough of, as this was my favorite event so far, focusing on the fun that is the core of Rock Cobbler.
Easily my favorite Rock Cobbler so far. Yeah, okay, it was a little to do with the distance, but I mean, you come out here, you know what to appreciate. Now that I'm 5 years in, Everyone that was out here, yeah, I think they had the same sentiment. It's always top-notch, great photographers, great views, everything you want. And Sam, congratulations. So yeah, let's keep it at this level 14. If you want to support us, please hit the subscribe button, put a comment down here, or go to our shop, support us on Patreon, so we can bring you more from Stay Dirt.